What if the quietest member of the Trump family had the most intriguing story to tell? Barron Trump has remained a mystery for years, rarely speaking in public and staying far from the political battles that define his last name. Unlike his older siblings, he has not embraced the family business or the media spotlight. But now, new revelations from someone who once worked inside the Trump household shed light on what life was really like for Donald Trump's youngest son. How much did his parents shape his upbringing? What role did Melania play in keeping him away from the public eye? And most importantly, what kind of future is Barron preparing for? Let's get into details. Barron Trump has always been a mystery. Unlike the other members of the Trump family, he has managed to stay away from the spotlight for most of his life. Despite being the son of a former United States president, little is known about his upbringing, his personality, or what life has been like for him behind the towering walls of Trump properties. The youngest son of Donald Trump and the only child of Melania Trump, Barron has often been seen in public only on rare occasions, leading to speculation about how he has been raised and what kind of childhood he has had. Many have wondered whether he has lived a life of luxury filled with privilege, or whether the pressures of growing up in such a high-profile family have taken a toll on him. Now, for the first time, a former nanny who once worked for the Trump family is speaking out, and what she has revealed has left many people stunned. While most presidential children live their lives under intense public scrutiny, Barron's case has been different. Unlike the Obama daughters or Chelsea Clinton, who had to navigate childhood under the watchful eyes of the media, Barron has remained largely in the shadows. His parents, particularly Melania Trump, have been fiercely protective of him, ensuring that very little information about his personal life is made public. But despite these efforts, some details have managed to surface, and they paint a picture that few expected. For years, it was widely assumed that Barron had been raised primarily by his mother, Melania, with little involvement from his father. Donald Trump himself once admitted that he never really changed diapers or took part in the day-to-day upbringing of any of his children, leaving those responsibilities to their mothers and nannies. Melania, on the other hand, has always portrayed herself as a hands-on mother, often speaking about the importance of family values and dedicating much of her time to raising her son. But according to someone who once worked inside the Trump household, the reality of Barron's childhood was far more complex than what was publicly shown. The former nanny, who has chosen to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, claims that while Melania was indeed involved in her son's upbringing, Barron's life was far from the picture-perfect story that had been painted in the media. According to her, there were long stretches of time where Barron was left largely in the care of household staff, as Melania traveled or focused on other responsibilities. While this is not unusual for families of their status, what stands out in her account is the emotional distance that seemed to exist within the household. She described Barron as a quiet and observant child who often preferred to keep to himself. Unlike other children from high-profile families, who are often surrounded by friends, Barron's social circle was extremely limited. The nanny suggested that this was not just due to the need for security, but also because there was a sense of isolation in his life. Growing up in Trump Tower, then later in the White House, and most recently at Mar-a-Lago, meant that Barron's world was vastly different from that of most children. He was surrounded by opulence, yet lacked the kind of freedom that many kids take for granted. It wasn't just the restrictions of his environment that made his childhood unique. It was also the dynamic between his parents. The former nanny described moments where Barron seemed caught between two very different personalities: his mother, who was protective yet often distant, and his father, who was largely absent from the day-to-day aspects of parenting. While Melania has often emphasized that she is devoted to her son's well-being, the nanny suggests that there were times when Barron longed for more personal connection rather than just protection. His father, on the other hand, was known to have an authoritative presence in the household, but he was rarely directly involved in Barron's life beyond public appearances. This lack of direct parental involvement was not unique to Barron. Donald Trump had previously admitted that he had left the raising of all his children largely to their mothers, only becoming more involved once they had grown older. While this approach may have worked for his older children, for Barron, it meant that much of his early life was spent with staff members rather than with his own parents. Despite these circumstances, Barron was not a neglected child. The nanny made it clear that he was well taken care of in every material sense. He had access to the best education, the most luxurious lifestyle, and a level of security that ensured he was always safe. But material wealth does not always compensate for emotional well-being. And this is where the former nanny's revelations become more concerning. She described Barron as a child who, despite his privileges, sometimes seemed lonely. There were times when he would retreat into himself, preferring solitude over social interaction. This was not necessarily unusual for a child of his age, but in his case, it seemed to be a defining characteristic of his upbringing. The former nanny also mentioned that Barron had a routine that was strictly monitored. His education was of the utmost importance, and he was expected to meet high academic standards. Unlike his older siblings, who had more public personas from a young age, Barron was shielded from most public engagements, and his life was carefully curated by those around him. This meant that while he was growing up in one of the most famous families in the world, his world itself remained surprisingly small. The lack of spontaneity in his childhood was something that stood out to the former nanny. Everything was planned, structured, and controlled, leaving little room for the kind of carefree experiences that define a typical childhood. While Melania was known to be very protective of Barron, the nanny hinted that this protectiveness sometimes felt like it bordered on overprotection. She described instances where normal childhood activities, such as playing freely with other children, were limited due to security concerns or parental decisions. While this is understandable given the unique circumstances of his life, it may have contributed to the sense of isolation that he reportedly felt. It wasn't just about security, it was also about control. Every aspect of his life was meticulously planned, and while this ensured that he was always in the best possible care, it also meant that he had little autonomy over his own experiences. The former nanny's account does not paint a picture of outright neglect or mistreatment, but rather one of a childhood that was far from typical. It raises questions about what it means to grow up in an environment where public image and security take precedence over personal freedom. For Barron, life was not about running through the park with friends or having spontaneous childhood adventures. Instead, it was about structure, discipline, and an ever-present awareness of who he was and what was expected of him. This is just the beginning of what the former nanny has revealed. Her insights into Barron's childhood provide a rare glimpse into a world that has remained largely hidden from the public eye. But what does this mean for Barron as he grows older? How has this carefully controlled upbringing shaped the young man he is becoming today? And most importantly, what other details remain undisclosed about the life of Donald Trump's youngest son? There are still many more revelations to uncover, and the former nanny's story is far from over. What she has shared so far is only the foundation of a much deeper and more complex narrative, one that challenges the assumptions many have made about Barron Trump's life. What comes next may be even more surprising than what has already been revealed. The public has long been fascinated by Barron Trump, not necessarily for what he has done, but for how little is known about him. Unlike his older siblings who have actively participated in business and politics, Barron has remained a background figure in the Trump family. This intentional privacy has only fueled curiosity, making every rare appearance or detail about his life a topic of interest. The former nanny's revelations have added a new layer to this mystery, offering a perspective from someone who was once inside the household. While the world often sees the carefully curated public moments of high-profile families, life behind closed doors can be vastly different. The Trump family is no exception. According to the nanny, Barron's life was highly structured, far more than the average child. His education was a primary focus, with an expectation that he would meet exceptionally high academic standards. Private tutors, specialized lessons, and carefully selected extracurricular activities ensured that he was always occupied with productive tasks. His schedule was meticulously planned, with little time left unaccounted for. It is not uncommon for children in wealthy and powerful families to have structured routines, but in Barron's case, it seemed to be more than just about education. His movements, interactions, and even leisure activities were carefully managed, creating an environment where spontaneity was rare. For someone growing up in the public eye, security measures are necessary, but according to the former nanny, this structure extended beyond security. It was about control. Every aspect of his daily life had a purpose, ensuring that he remained insulated from outside influences. Despite his highly organized routine, Barron was not without personal interests. From a young age, he developed a fascination with sports, particularly soccer, which became one of his favorite activities. Unlike some of his father's interests in golf or business, Barron seemed to gravitate toward the fast-paced nature of the game, and his passion for it was encouraged. Melania Trump even mentioned in interviews that he enjoyed playing and following soccer, making it one of the few public details about his personal preferences. The Nanny's account suggests that while Barron had access to some of the best resources available, there was a notable absence of casual social interactions with peers his age. Friendships, particularly those outside the controlled environment of private schooling, were limited. This was not necessarily due to a lack of effort on his part, but rather a reflection of the controlled world he lived in. The social limitations he experienced were largely a product of his unique circumstances, where every interaction was scrutinized, every movement carefully considered. Melania, known for being fiercely protective of her son, ensured that Barron was shielded from the chaos of public life. Unlike his older siblings, who had been exposed to media attention from an early age, Barron was intentionally kept away from excessive public exposure. This decision was likely made to allow him to have as normal of a childhood as possible given the circumstances. However, it also meant that his social world remained small, primarily revolving around private tutors, a select few acquaintances, and carefully arranged gatherings. While this level of protection is understandable, it may have also contributed to a certain level of isolation. The former nanny described Barron as an intelligent and observant child, someone who absorbed everything around him but did not always express his thoughts openly. Unlike children who grow up with a more carefree attitude, Barron had a heightened awareness of who he was and what was expected of him. He was raised with an understanding that his every action carried weight, that being the son of a former president came with responsibilities, even if he had not chosen them himself. His father's role in his upbringing was different from what some might expect. While Donald Trump has often spoken proudly of Barron, his parenting style followed the same pattern he had with his older children, remaining distant in the early years and becoming more involved as they grew older. This approach meant that much of Barron's childhood was spent primarily under the influence of his mother. Melania has publicly stated that she was very hands-on with her son's upbringing, often describing herself as his primary caretaker. However, the nanny's account suggests that while Melania was protective and involved, her time was also divided between her own responsibilities, including her role as First Lady, and later, her various business and social engagements. This meant that there were times when Barron was left in the care of staff, ensuring that his strict schedule remained uninterrupted. He was never neglected, but his life was dictated by structure rather than personal choice. This environment shaped him into a child who valued order and discipline. According to the nanny, Barron had a maturity beyond his years, likely a result of the controlled environment in which he was raised. He was not the type to engage in reckless behavior or demand attention. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet confidence, fully aware of his family's status, but never appearing to exploit it for personal gain. While many of his peers were enjoying the typical experiences of childhood, Barron's life was different. His schooling, social interactions, and even his hobbies were curated in a way that set him apart. This separation from the usual teenage experiences may have given him a unique perspective, but also meant that he lived in a world few could truly relate to. The nanny's reflections raise questions about the long-term effects of such an upbringing. On one hand, Barron has had access to resources, education, and experiences that most children could only dream of. On the other hand, growing up in an environment of control and isolation may have had its own challenges. His relationship with his father was also an area of curiosity. While Donald Trump has publicly acknowledged Barron's intelligence and growth, the depth of their bond has remained largely private. The nanny suggested that their interactions were often formal rather than deeply personal, more about acknowledgement than deep emotional connection. This dynamic was consistent with how Trump had approached parenting in general, focusing on his children more as they reached adulthood. Despite these complexities, Barron has grown into a young man who appears poised and self-assured. While he has not followed in the public-facing footsteps of his siblings, he has still captured attention simply by virtue of who he is. As he moves further into adulthood, there is growing speculation about what role he may eventually play within the Trump family, and whether he will continue to remain private or step into the public eye in a more significant way. The controlled nature of his upbringing has undoubtedly shaped him, but whether it has prepared him for a larger role in the future remains to be seen. Those who have observed him closely, including the former nanny, believe that while he may not actively seek attention, he is fully aware of the expectations placed upon him. What remains uncertain is how much of his life has been defined by his circumstances versus his personal choices. The Trump name carries weight, and for Barron, that has meant growing up under expectations that he had no say in. The nanny's insights have opened the door to a discussion about what it truly means to be the child of one of the most polarizing figures in modern political history. His story is still unfolding, and as he continues to grow, more will inevitably come to light. But for now, the question remains: what kind of life does Barron Trump truly want for himself? And will he ever be able to fully step out of the shadow of his family's legacy? There is still much more to uncover, and the nanny's perspective is only one piece of a much larger story. For years, Barron Trump has been the most private member of his family, a figure who has remained largely out of the public eye despite the immense attention surrounding his last name. His childhood was spent in some of the most famous residences in the world, yet he has often been described as someone who prefers a quiet existence, detached from the constant media presence that follows his family. While his older siblings have embraced the spotlight in various ways, Barron's path has been notably different. The former nanny's reflections paint a picture of a child who grew up in an environment unlike any other. His life was not just shaped by wealth and status, but by the expectations that came with being the son of one of the most well-known figures in modern history. From a young age, he understood the weight of his name, the scrutiny that would follow him, and the reality that his life would never be entirely private. That awareness influenced the way he carried himself, shaping his personality in ways that set him apart from his peers. Despite his public silence, those who have been around Barron describe him as intelligent and introspective. He is not known for seeking attention, nor does he display the same public-facing ambitions as some of his siblings. This reserved nature is something that the former nanny observed early on. He was always aware of his surroundings, always mindful of the presence of others, yet he rarely felt the need to speak more than necessary. It was as if he had learned to navigate the world with quiet observation rather than loud expression. Melania Trump's protective nature played a significant role in this. She was determined to shield her son from the pressures that came with their name, ensuring that his upbringing was as controlled as possible. The former nanny noted that Melania's approach to parenting was different from many in her social circle. While other high-profile families often relied on large teams of caregivers, Melania was hands-on, overseeing the details of Barron's life with precision. She made key decisions about his education, social interactions, and public appearances, ensuring that he was not exposed to unnecessary scrutiny. Yet, this level of protection also meant that Barron had a childhood that was far from ordinary. He did not experience the same freedoms that most children take for granted. While other teenagers spent their time socializing freely, making mistakes, and learning through experience, Barron's world was structured and carefully monitored. The former nanny suggested that while he never lacked material comfort, there were moments when it seemed as though he longed for a more spontaneous existence, one where he could simply be a kid without the weight of expectations. The dynamic between his parents was another aspect that shaped his upbringing. Donald Trump, known for his demanding business career and later his role in politics, was not an everyday presence in Barron's life in the same way Melania was. This was not unusual. Trump himself has spoken openly about how he took a more hands-off approach to parenting during his children's early years, only becoming more involved as they grew older. While Barron's relationship with his father has never been extensively discussed, those close to the family have indicated that it is one built on a mixture of admiration and formality. Trump has publicly expressed his pride in Barron on multiple occasions, often noting his son's height and intelligence. He has referred to him as a very special boy, and has even joked about him being taller than his older brothers. However, beyond these remarks, their interactions remain largely private. The former nanny's insights suggest that their relationship was not one of constant presence, but rather one of recognition from a distance, with Melania serving as the primary figure in Barron's daily life. Barron's education was another defining aspect of his childhood. Unlike his siblings, who attended different institutions over the years, Barron's schooling was carefully selected to provide both prestige and privacy. He was the first child of a president to attend St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Maryland, instead of the traditional Sidwell Friends School, which has educated many presidential children in the past. This decision reflected Melania's desire to give him an experience that was distinct from the political atmosphere that surrounded his family during their time in Washington, D.C. The former nanny noted that education was taken very seriously in the Trump household. There was an expectation that Barron would excel academically, and his routine was structured to ensure that he remained focused. Private tutoring, specialized lessons, and a curriculum designed to prepare him for the future were all part of his daily life. He was given every advantage possible, yet with that came a level of discipline that was non-negotiable. His parents wanted him to succeed not just because of his last name, but because they believed he had the potential to do so. Despite this structured environment, there were moments where Barron was allowed to enjoy his interests. Sports, particularly soccer, became one of the few areas where he could fully immerse himself without restriction. He was passionate about the game and spent considerable time training and playing whenever possible. Melania has spoken about how much he enjoys the sport, and over the years he has been seen attending major soccer events, further highlighting his enthusiasm for it. Yet even in these moments of enjoyment, there was an undeniable element of control. Security concerns meant that he could not engage in the sport as freely as other kids his age. While he had opportunities to play, they were often within carefully managed environments. The former nanny suggested that this level of protection, while necessary, may have contributed to the sense of detachment that Barron sometimes exhibited. He was given everything, yet he lived a life where spontaneity was rare, and every experience was measured against the backdrop of his family's public image. Over time, Barron has become more visible, particularly as he has grown older. His height, now towering over most of his family members, has drawn public attention, as has his composed demeanor during rare public appearances. Unlike his father, who thrives in the spotlight, Barron does not seem to seek attention. He carries himself with a level of formality that is uncommon for someone his age, a reflection of the environment in which he was raised. As he approaches adulthood, there is speculation about what path he will take. Will he follow in his father's footsteps, entering the world of business and politics? Or will he carve out his own space, separate from the weight of the Trump legacy? Those who have observed him closely believe that whatever he chooses, it will be on his own terms. He has been raised in a world of expectations, but he has also been taught to be independent in his thinking. The former nanny's insights provide a rare glimpse into a life that has been carefully shielded from the public eye. They reveal a child who has grown up with immense privilege, but also with unique challenges. His story is still unfolding, and as he steps further into adulthood, the world will be watching to see what kind of man Barron Trump will become. The layers of his upbringing, the influences that have shaped him, and the path he will ultimately choose remain subjects of speculation. But one thing is certain: Barron Trump is not just the youngest son of a former president. He is an individual who has spent his life in the shadows of a powerful name, carefully navigating a world that has always watched from a distance. What comes next for him is a question that only time will answer. But as more details emerge, the fascination surrounding him will only continue to grow. As Barron Trump moves closer to adulthood, the curiosity surrounding him only grows. Unlike his older siblings who have taken active roles in business, politics, or media, Barron has remained an enigma, choosing to stay largely out of public discourse. His upbringing was different from that of most presidential children, carefully managed, highly private, and insulated from the world in a way that few can fully understand. While much has been speculated about his future, those who have known him, including the former nanny, suggest that he has always been aware of the expectations placed upon him. Whether or not he chooses to embrace the public sphere like his father remains an open question. But what is clear is that his life has been shaped by a unique set of circumstances that will undoubtedly influence his next steps. Throughout his childhood, Barron was raised with a strong sense of discipline and structure, something that those around him noticed early on. The former nanny observed that he was not a typical child in the sense of spontaneity and freedom. Every decision regarding his upbringing was carefully thought out, ensuring that he remained shielded from unnecessary scrutiny. His education was prioritized, his routines were closely monitored, and his social interactions were kept within a controlled environment. Even in settings where other children might have had more flexibility, Barron's life was structured with an almost strategic precision. This level of oversight was not necessarily restrictive in a harmful way, but it did set him apart from his peers. Unlike children who grow up experiencing the unpredictability of daily life, Barron was raised with the understanding that his actions carried weight, that the world would always be watching. This awareness, ingrained from a young age, likely contributed to his composed and measured demeanor in public appearances. Despite the structured nature of his upbringing, there were moments where Barron was able to embrace his own interests. His passion for soccer became one of the few areas where he was able to express himself freely, engaging in something that was not directly tied to his family's legacy. Over the years, he has been spotted at major soccer events, and those who have followed his rare public outings have noted that his enthusiasm for the sport seems genuine. His ability to maintain a level of privacy in an era where social media dominates public perception is also something that sets him apart. While many children from high-profile families find themselves under constant media surveillance, Barron has managed to remain largely unseen. This is not by accident. His mother, Melania, has been instrumental in ensuring that his personal life remains his own, avoiding the kind of exposure that often comes with being the child of a political figure. However, as he grows older, maintaining this level of privacy may become more challenging. The Trump name carries an undeniable presence, and with that comes expectations. Whether or not he chooses to step into the public sphere, he will always be viewed through the lens of his family's legacy. The former nanny's reflections suggest that while Barron may not actively seek attention, he is fully aware of the conversations that surround him. He is not naive to the fact that his every move, even those as simple as attending an event, can become a topic of discussion. His relationship with his father remains a point of interest for many. While Donald Trump has spoken about Barron in public, often in admiration of his height or intelligence, their interactions remain mostly private. Unlike his older siblings, who have openly discussed their father's influence on their lives and careers, Barron has yet to speak publicly about his perspective. The dynamic between them, as observed by those who have been around the family, is one built on respect but also distance, similar to how Trump approached parenting in the early years of his other children's lives. There is still much to be uncovered about who Barron Trump truly is. He has spent his life on the periphery of the media's attention, but as he moves into adulthood, that may change. Whether he chooses to embrace the public eye or continue maintaining his privacy, one thing is certain: his life will always be subject to speculation. His upbringing has prepared him for a world of expectations, but only time will tell what path he ultimately decides to take. As Barron Trump steps into adulthood, the speculation surrounding his future intensifies. Unlike his siblings, who have openly embraced their roles within the Trump family's business and political circles, Barron remains a figure of curiosity rather than certainty. His childhood was carefully protected, his exposure to the public tightly controlled, and his upbringing vastly different from that of his older brothers and sisters. While his parents have ensured that he was given every opportunity to succeed, the world is left wondering, what path will Barron choose? His presence in the public eye has remained minimal, yet every rare appearance sparks discussion. Whether it's his towering height, his composed demeanor, or his noticeable silence amid the loud political landscape that surrounds his family, Barron is an anomaly among high-profile figures. While his older siblings spent much of their youth engaging with the media, attending high-profile events, and working alongside their father, Barron has remained in the background. This absence from the spotlight has created a sense of mystery, making people even more curious about the person he is becoming. There is no indication that Barron will follow the traditional path of a Trump heir. Unlike Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, or Ivanka Trump, who have all played active roles in their father's businesses and political campaigns, Barron has yet to show any public inclination toward business, politics, or media. Those who have been close to the family suggest that he is charting his own course, one that may not necessarily align with the legacy of his last name. While his upbringing was steeped in structure and expectation, there is a growing sense that he may take a different path, away from the pressures that come with being a Trump. His mother, Melania Trump, has remained steadfast in her efforts to protect him from unwanted attention, ensuring that his private life remains exactly that, private. But with adulthood comes independence, and soon, Barron will have the ability to make his own choices about how much he wants to engage with the public. Will he step into the limelight as a member of one of America's most polarizing families? Or will he retreat further into the privacy that his mother has worked so hard to maintain? While much remains uncertain, one thing is clear. Barron has been raised with an acute awareness of who he is and what his last name represents. The former nanny's observations suggest that he has always carried himself with an understanding that his life is different from that of an average person. He has learned from an early age that his actions, no matter how small, can become headlines. This awareness has made him cautious, measured, and reluctant to engage in unnecessary public attention. Unlike his father, who has thrived on media coverage and public scrutiny, Barron appears to have adopted a more reserved nature. He is not seen making statements, engaging in controversy, or positioning himself as a public figure. Instead, he has remained an observer, someone who understands the power of his name but does not yet appear eager to wield it. His interests, as far as they are known, remain outside the realm of politics. His passion for soccer and his academic pursuits suggest a different trajectory from the one his family is best known for. As he moves forward, the world will be watching to see what choices he makes. Will he join the family business? Will he carve out a completely separate identity for himself? Or will he remain a private individual, opting for a life away from the public and political stage? These are questions that only time will answer. What is certain is that Barron Trump will always carry the weight of his last name. He may choose to embrace it, redefine it, or distance himself from it entirely. But he will never escape the legacy that comes with being the son of a former president. His childhood has been one of control, protection, and careful management. But adulthood offers him the freedom to define himself on his own terms. Whether he steps into the spotlight or continues to remain in the background, Barron Trump will remain a subject of interest. His story is still being written, and the choices he makes in the coming years will determine how the world sees him, not just as the son of a former president, but as an individual shaping his own future. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.